There are moments in life when everything quietly falls apart. Not with noise or drama, but with a silence so deep it feels like the world has stepped away from you. We carry things longer than we should. Guilt, old dreams, versions of ourselves that no longer fit. We call it strength, but sometimes it's only fear in disguise. This is a story about letting go, not as surrender, but as courage. About discipline that doesn't harden the heart, and faith that doesn't demand answers. In a quiet valley where mornings arrive slowly and the hills remember every footprint, there lived a shepherd who believed holding on was the same as surviving. This story will show you why healing begins when we loosen our grip, and why rebirth often starts in the gentlest way. The shepherd lived where the valley narrowed and the wind slowed down, as if even nature knew to speak softly there. Every morning, before the sun lifted its head over the hills, he rose. Same hour, same steps, same worn boots by the door. Discipline shaped his days with quiet precision. The sheep followed him because he never wavered. The land trusted him because he never rushed. To anyone watching from a distance, his life looked peaceful, simple, even fulfilled. But peace and silence are not the same thing. Inside him, something remained unfinished. He had learned long ago that staying was easier than leaving, that routine was safer than hope. The valley had become his shelter, not because it gave him joy, but because it asked nothing from him except consistency. And consistency he could give. He spoke little, not because he had nothing to say, but because words felt heavy now. They carried memories, faces, a life that once moved in a different direction. So he chose quiet instead. Quiet did not ask questions. At night, when the sheep settled and the sky filled with stars that looked too distant to touch, he would sit outside his small stone home. He never looked up for long. Looking up reminded him that things could change, and change felt dangerous. He told himself he was strong, that endurance was strength, that holding on was proof of discipline. But strength, when built only on survival, becomes fragile. Somewhere deep within him lived a belief he never questioned. If he let go of what was lost, it would mean it never mattered. And so he stayed. He stayed with the land. He stayed with the routine. He stayed with the weight he carried quietly in his chest. What he didn't know, what most of us don't, is that staying can sometimes be the hardest way to avoid moving forward. And every journey, no matter how quiet, begins with an unspoken tension between who we are and who we're afraid to become. Order became the shepherd's language. While others measured their lives in conversations, milestones, or memories, he measured his in patterns, the path through the valley, the number of steps between the fence and the stream, the rhythm of mornings that always began the same way. Discipline gave his days a shape, and in that shape, he felt safe. There was comfort in knowing what came next. Each small success, every healthy lamb, every quiet evening, every storm endured, felt like proof that he was doing something right. Purpose, to him, was not passion, it was reliability. He believed strength lived in showing up, even when the heart stayed silent. And for a while, it worked. The valley responded to his consistency. The sheep thrived under his watch. The land seemed to settle around him, as if approving his choice to stay. People in nearby towns spoke of him as steady, dependable, unbreakable. But unbreakable things do not bend. And what does not bend eventually cracks. Without realizing it, he had turned discipline into a wall. Order kept the past out. but it also kept the future away. He never allowed himself to imagine anything beyond the next day's work. Dreams felt indulgent. Hope felt reckless. When memories tried to surface, he worked harder. When emotions stirred, he tightened his routine. He believed that if he stayed busy enough, the ache would quiet itself. Yet pain does not disappear when ignored. It waits. Sometimes in the middle of his work, he would pause, just for a moment. A strange heaviness would pass through him like a shadow drifting over the valley. He would breathe, steady himself, and continue. No reflection, no questions. This was his quiet flaw. He thought discipline was about control, not care. And while order gave him structure, it slowly took something from him. His ability to listen to what his heart had been asking for all along. The rise had begun, but so had the tension that would undo it. The day the valley broke did not announce itself. There was no warning in the sky, no unease in the air. Morning arrived the way it always did. Soft, familiar, obedient to routine. The shepherd followed his path, guided his flock, trusted the land as he always had. And then, without reason or apology, everything shifted. A sudden storm rolled through the hills, violent and fast. The wind howled like something wounded. The ground, soaked from days of unseen rain, gave way beneath the slopes he knew too well. In moments, the order he relied on turned against him. He tried to act quickly. Discipline took over. Commands, movements, instinct. But chaos does not listen to preparation. By the time the storm passed, the valley felt foreign. Several sheep were gone, lost to the land he thought he understood. Fences lay broken, paths erased. What he had protected for years vanished in a single afternoon. He stood there long after the rain stopped, soaked, silent, unmoving. The loss was practical, yes, but it was also personal. These sheep were not just responsibility, they were proof. Proof that his way of living worked. Proof that holding on had meaning. Without them, something inside him collapsed. That night, the quiet felt heavier than ever. The stone walls of his home did not comfort him. The routine he trusted offered no guidance. For the first time in years, discipline failed to save him. Questions rose that he had buried for too long. What if control was an illusion? What if strength could still end in loss? He did not cry. He did not speak. He simply sat with the truth he could no longer avoid. Even the most disciplined life cannot protect us from breaking. And when the valley broke, so did the belief that holding on was enough. This was not just failure. It was the beginning of doubt. After the storm, the shepherd moved as if nothing had changed. He repaired the fences with careful hands, walked the same paths, rose at the same hour. To anyone watching, it might have looked like resilience, like discipline in its purest form. But inside him, everything was clenched. He replayed the day again and again, searching for a moment he could have controlled. A decision he could have made differently, a sign he should have noticed. Guilt became his quiet companion, walking beside him through the valley. If he had been better, stronger, more careful, this wouldn't have happened. That thought wrapped itself around his mind like a vow. He refused to count what was lost, refused to speak of it. Naming the loss would make it real, and reality felt unbearable. Instead, he held on to memory as if it could reverse time. Each remembered detail became a thread, tying him to a version of life that no longer existed. Letting go felt like betrayal. To release the past would mean accepting that his effort was not enough. That discipline did not guarantee safety. That faith, if he still had it, did not protect him the way he once believed, so he tightened his grip. He worked longer hours, slept less. Silence grew heavier, not peaceful. The valley, once familiar, felt like a mirror reflecting everything he didn't want to face. At night he sat where the storm had torn the land open. He imagined what the valley used to look like, what his life used to feel like. The mind, desperate for comfort, clings to what it knows, even when it hurts. He told himself he was honoring what was lost, but in truth, he was afraid of who he would be without it. Because if he let go of the past, he would have to step into uncertainty, and uncertainty demands courage, not control. This was the denial, not loud, not dramatic, just a man gripping yesterday so tightly that tomorrow could not reach him. The quietest night came without ceremony. No storm, no wind, no sound strong enough to distract him from himself. The shepherd sat alone outside his home. The valley stretched before him like an unanswered question. The sheep had settled. The land was still, and for the first time in a long while, there was nothing left to fix. That was when the emptiness arrived. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't hurt the way grief usually does. It was worse than that. Flat, hollow, colorless. The kind of silence that makes you realize how long you've been running. He felt tired in a way sleep could not touch. All the effort, all the discipline, all the holding on, and still something essential had slipped through his fingers, not in the storm, but slowly, over years of refusing to feel. He wondered when he had last felt joy without guarding it, when he had last believed that the future could hold something new, not just repeat what was already gone. For the first time, he did not reach for routine. For the first time, he allowed himself to sit with nothing. The valley did not comfort him. The stars did not inspire him. Even faith felt distant, like a language he once spoke but had forgotten. And in that stillness, a quiet truth surfaced. He could not fix his way out of this. No amount of discipline could fill what denial had carved out. No strength could force healing to arrive. He had reached the place where control ended, and something else had to begin. This was the lowest point. Not because everything was lost, but because nothing was numbing the loss anymore. Yet even here, especially here, something subtle shifted. When a man finally stops running, he creates space. And space, though it feels empty, is the only place change can enter. The night held him in silence, and for the first time, the silence did not demand that he be strong. The encounter did not feel important at first. It happened the next morning, as the shepherd walked the edge of the valley where the land still bore the scars of the storm. An old traveler stood near the broken path, resting on a simple staff, watching the hills as if they were speaking to him. The shepherd almost passed by. He was not looking for conversation. He was not looking for answers. But something in the man's stillness felt familiar, unhurried, unafraid of silence. They exchanged a brief nod. Nothing more. After a while the traveler spoke, not as someone offering wisdom, but as someone noticing truth. "You walk like a man carrying something heavier than what was lost," he said gently. The words landed without force. No accusation. No pity. The shepherd didn't respond. He only stood there, unsure why his chest felt tight. The traveler continued, eyes still on the valley. "Most people think faith is about holding on," he said. "But sometimes faith is trusting what remains after you let go." There was no lesson, no instruction, just a sentence, released into the air like it did not need permission to exist. The shepherd wanted to argue, wanted to explain, wanted to defend the years of discipline, the choices, the staying, but the words never came. Because deep down, he knew the traveler wasn't speaking to his loss. He was speaking to his grip. Before leaving, the traveler placed a small stone on the ground, a marker, nothing more. "The valley will heal," he said. "So will you, but not by force." And then he walked away, leaving the shepherd alone again. Yet the silence felt different now. For the first time since the storm, the shepherd did not feel the need to tighten his hold on the past. The idea of release, once terrifying, now felt possible. Truth had entered quietly, and that was enough. Change did not arrive all at once. It came the way morning light does, slow, almost unnoticed, until suddenly the valley looked different. The shepherd did not wake up transformed. He still followed his routines, still walked the familiar paths, but something within those actions had softened. Discipline was no longer a shield, it became a form of care. He began with small things. He stopped revisiting the place where the land had broken, not out of avoidance, but acceptance. He allowed the fences to remain imperfect for a while, allowed the days to pass without measuring their worth by what he repaired. Some mornings he sat longer than usual, breathing in the quiet instead of rushing to fill it. When memories surfaced, he didn't push them away. He let them pass through him, heavy but no longer sharp. This was his release, not forgetting, not dismissing, simply loosening his grip. He realized that letting go did not erase meaning. The years of effort still mattered. The care he gave still lived on. What he released was not the past, but the belief that it defined him. Discipline shifted its purpose. Instead of controlling the world, it steadied his heart. He ate with intention, slept when he was tired, allowed rest without guilt. These were not acts of weakness. They were acts of trust. Some days were harder than others. Old habits whispered. The urge to tighten control returned. But now, he noticed it. And noticing was enough to choose differently. The valley, too, showed signs of healing. Grass began to return where the storm had stripped the earth. New paths formed where old ones had disappeared. And with each small act of acceptance, the shepherd felt something unfamiliar but welcome. Lightness. Not happiness, not certainty, just space. And in that space, he felt the quiet beginning of rebirth. Growth is rarely dramatic. More often, it is tested in silence, when no one is watching and nothing feels certain. The shepherd felt the old shadows return without warning. A morning mist, a fence left unfinished, a moment when the valley felt too quiet again. The familiar voice whispered that discipline was slipping, that control was necessary, that letting go had made him careless. Fear wears the mask of responsibility. He noticed how quickly his body remembered the old tension, the tightening chest, the urge to correct everything at once. For years, this reflex had defined him. But this time he paused. Instead of reacting, he observed. He reminded himself that strength was not urgency, that discipline was not punishment. Growth, he realized, was not about never returning to old patterns. It was about meeting them differently. Some days he faltered. He worked too long, slept too little, reached for control out of habit. And when he noticed, shame tried to follow, but he didn't let it stay. Consistency, he learned, was not perfection. It was returning, again and again, to what mattered, to presence, to balance. to the quiet promise he had made to himself in the stillness of that night. The valley reflected this struggle. New grass grew unevenly, some areas healed faster than others, yet the land did not rush itself. It trusted time. So did he. Each time the old fear rose, he met it with patience instead of force. He continued his work, not to prove his worth, but to honor it. Discipline became devotion, not defense. And slowly the shadows lost their power. They still appeared, but they no longer ruled him. Because strength, when rooted in awareness, does not shout. It endures. The new dawn did not feel like victory. There was no moment of triumph, no sudden clarity that announced he had arrived. Instead, it felt like waking up in a room you had always lived in. Only now, the windows were open. The shepherd noticed it in the smallest ways. The valley no longer felt heavy when he walked through it. Silence no longer pressed against his chest. Even the scars left by the storm seemed gentler, not because they had vanished, but because he no longer fought their presence. Purpose returned quietly, not as ambition, not as urgency, but as alignment. He cared for the land without needing it to validate him. He guided the sheep without measuring his worth by their number. His discipline had become a rhythm that supported life instead of controlling it. Some evenings he looked up at the stars again, not searching for answers, just acknowledging that the world was wider than his fear. Faith, he realized, was no longer something he clung to. It was something he walked with, a quiet trust that even when things broke, meaning could still emerge. The valley healed in its own time. So did he. There was room now, for rest, for curiosity, for moments that did not need explanation. The future no longer felt like a threat. It felt open. This was the transformation. Not a new life, but a new way of living. The shepherd had not become stronger by holding on harder. He had become lighter by releasing what he could not control. And in that lightness he found peace. Not because life was certain, but because he finally was. And now, the story turns gently toward you. Because the shepherd's journey was never only his own. We all carry valleys inside us, places where we stayed too long, held too tightly, or believed that strength meant endurance without rest. We learn discipline before we learn healing. We learn control before we learn trust. But life, quietly and without cruelty, teaches us otherwise. Sometimes failure is not punishment. Sometimes it is release. Sometimes what breaks is not your world, but the illusion that you had to carry everything alone. Letting go does not mean what you loved was meaningless. It means you are brave enough to stop letting loss define you. Discipline, when guided by fear, becomes a cage. Discipline, when guided by care, becomes freedom. You do not need to rush your healing. You do not need to explain your journey to anyone. Transformation happens in ordinary days, through small, honest choices. There will be moments when old shadows return. Meet them with patience, not force. Strength grows in consistency, not perfection. And when the quiet comes, do not run from it. Silence is where truth speaks most clearly. If you are standing in a place that feels broken, remember this. Nothing meaningful is ever truly lost when it teaches you how to live more gently. Your journey is still unfolding. Your rebirth does not need an audience, and the light you're searching for may already be waiting. The moment you loosen your grip. If this story resonated with you, share it with someone who may need it. And if you wish to walk more journeys like this, stay a little longer. Some stories are meant to be heard right when the heart is ready.